Alright, trying to finish up this chapter here, man. It's not easy. For many of those who had survived, it was only now on the second day when they first came to terms with their own injuries. Recounts one teenage girl. I found a piece of mirror and looked into it. I was so surprised. I found my left eye looked just like a pomegranate, and I also found cuts on my right eye and on my nose and on my lower jaw. It was horrible. I was very shocked to find myself looking like a monster. I even wish I had died with my sisters. Another young woman, Saiko Aikida, was also horrified by the image when she first viewed it in the mirror. Indeed, so concerned had been Seiko's parents of what their daughter would see that they took the precaution of hiding all mirrors. What the girl and thousands of others Hiroshima eventually saw at first they did not recognize. Seiko's once pretty face had melted like wax. Gone forever were the bright eyes, smooth skin, and quick familiar smile. Now only a hideous, frightening mask stared back. Rather than live out the remainder of her life as a freak, no love, no husband, no children. From that first horrifying glimpse, the young woman made it her life's mission to kill herself. Not even death would be more terrible than the face she would be forced to live with forever. When the parents learned of their daughter's determination to end her life, their fear naturally reached panic proportions. Locked in her own personal nightmare, Seiko then overheard her distraught parents speaking softly in another room. I know her face is terrible, said the sad father to the mother, but I am so glad she lived. I love Seiko no matter what she looks like. Hearing such words from the man she loved most on earth caused a sudden change in the young woman. Knowing that someone, anyone, could actually still love her in spite of her looks was startling to the girl. After thinking over how selfish had been her plan, those loving words straight from her father's heart were enough that Seiko determined to deal with her problems directly, and not bring even more tears and sadness into her parents' lives. Fearful of another such attack, those who could flee Hiroshima did. One of those was Tsutomu Yamaguchi. In this city on business, when the bomb exploded, Yamaguchi spent a terrifying night in the stricken area at a local air raid shelter. The blood-curdling screams of the dying all around made sleep and rest impossible. On the following day, with his wounds wrapped in bandages, Yamaguchi navigated through piles of burnt and mangled bodies until he reached a railroad station. From there, he would catch one of the first trains to escape Hiroshima and return the nearly 200 miles back to his home. There in beautiful Nagasaki, the businessman was sure he would be safe. Yeah, there's a God. Hey, out of a population of nearly 300,000, in all likelihood, half or 150,000 men, women, and children died in Hiroshima on that day, August 6, 1945. And of those who survived, thousands would not live to see another year, another month, even another week. U.S. President Harry Truman. 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima. It is an atomic bomb. We are now prepared to obliterate more rapidly and completely every productive enterprise the Japanese have above ground in any city. If they do not now accept our terms, we are unconditional, they may expect a rain of rumor from the air like that, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. Okay. Hit the Japs again and again. An enthusiastic U.S. Senator from Georgia, Richard Russell, telegraphed to Truman. Hit them, urged Russell, until they are brought groveling to their knees. There she goes, someone said. Out of the belly of the B-29, what looked like a black object came downward. Soon a whirlwind from the skies will pulverize thousands of its buildings and tens of thousands of its inhabitants. Does anyone feel any pity or compassion for the poor devils about to die? Not when one thinks of Pearl Harbor and of the Death March on Bataan. So wrote William L. Lawrence, former Pulitzer Prize winner, now science writer for the New York Times, as he watched the second atomic bomb to be dropped on Japan disappear toward Nagasaki below. In 40 seconds, the bomb would explode over the unsuspecting city. In the 48th second, tens of thousands of men, women, children, babies, animals, all will be vaporized, carbonized, blackened like burnt logs, skinned alive by heat and blast, covered with blisters the size of softball, shredded like cabbage by flying glass, nails, and splinters. And almost all had absolutely nothing to do with Pearl Harbor, the Death March at Bataan, or even the war. Would the writer have been so euphoric about this bomb, this thing of beauty as he termed it, had he been on the ground to witness the effects of the other bomb, the one which had been dropped on Hiroshima 3 days previous? In all likelihood, yes. After all, Lawrence was the only journalist present at the initial test of the bomb in New Mexico, and thus he certainly had a better understanding than most of the power behind this new wonder weapon and its method for dealing out death and destruction over a massive scale. However, had the reporter witnessed for himself the fate of those victims who somehow managed to survive the bomb's blast and what they endured during the following days, weeks, months, and years, perhaps that sobering sight alone would have moderated Lawrence's joy somewhat over this marvelous new weapon, this great thing of beauty, but probably not. Even though we were turning away in the opposite direction, and despite the fact that it was broad daylight in our cabin, all of us became aware of a giant flash that flooded our cabin with intense light. We removed our glasses after the first flash, but the light still lingered on. It's a bluish green light that illuminated the entire sky all around. A tremendous blast wave struck our ship and made it tremble from nose to tail. This was followed by 4 more blasts in rapid succession, each resounding like a boom of cannon fire hitting our plane from all directions. Observers in the tail of a ship saw a giant ball of fire rise as though from the bowels of the earth, belching forth enormous white smoke rings. Next they saw a giant pillar of purple fire 10,000 feet high, shooting skyward with an enormous speed. Eventually reaching the stratosphere at a height of 60,000 feet, over 11 miles high, Lawrence and the crew of the B-29 could still view the mushroom cloud over Nagasaki from 200 miles away. As was the case for those who dropped the bomb 3 days previous, once the science writer and his Nagasaki bomber crew reached home, there would be lots of backslapping, congratulations all around, laughter, food, and beer aplenty. A great celebration for a mission accomplished, for a job well done. Upwards of 8,000 people perished in the blinding flash when the bomb exploded over not only Japan's most Christian city, but one of the nation's most beautiful and untouched cities, Nagasaki. Again, the same nightmare was played out here as was played out 3 days previously in Hiroshima. People, including all those attending Mass in the cathedral, vaporized in a split second. Others carbonized like charcoal, melting eyeballs running down faces that no longer had features. Blisters as big as grapefruit, skin hanging in sheets, bodies shredded by glass splinters and metal, and again, hours, days later, the hopeless attempts of stunned, suffering survivors trying to save the unsavable. I thought only a week ago I'd have been horrified at a paper cut on my finger, remembers 15-year-old schoolgirl Michi Hattori. Now I found myself helping carrying dead people whose skin was tearing off of my hands. Fortunately, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was not one of them. Upon his return from Hiroshima with his burns still swathed in bandages, the businessman reported for work on August 9th. Yamaguchi's boss and co-workers listened spellbound as the exhausted and injured man described how a single bomb had destroyed an entire city. At 11:02, and once again as before, less than 2 miles from the center, Yamaguchi saw a familiar flash of light. This time a 25-kiloton plutonium bomb exploded above Nagasaki, throwing Yamaguchi to the ground. Once more, the businessman staggered away from an atomic blast. Reaching home, Yamaguchi, his wife, and the baby son survived and spent the following weeks in a shelter near what was once their home. It was my destiny that I experienced this twice, and I am still alive to convey what happened to the grateful husband and father simply. On the same day as Nagasaki, August 9th, Japan suffered another blow. The United States clearly ruled the sky above Japan and could with impunity do whatever it chose. In desperation, Japanese military leaders proposed a daring plan: a suicide raid on the Marianas Island home base of the deadly B-29s. If the huge bombers could be destroyed on the ground, a surprise attack, most of the firebombing raids would cease, as would the attacks by the new atomic weapon. Thus began a secret attempt to concentrate hundreds of Japanese bombers and thousands of men for the suicide mission. Unfortunately, American intelligence learned of the move, and swarms of U.S. bombers and fighters attacked and destroyed most of the secret aircraft, thereby preempting the bold plan. Additionally, by the end of August, the third atomic bomb was scheduled to be delivered and dropped, this time on the already destroyed Japanese capital, Tokyo. Having heard the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that very day, one Tokyo's housewife's confusion and frantic state of mind was certainly shared by millions more. Up to now, we've been ordered not to wear white garments, not even when it was hot, because they were easy for enemy planes to see. Now we're warned not to wear black garments because they burn easily. So what in the world is safe for us to wear? We don't know anymore. The thought of a single aircraft destroying a large city in an instant is driving us to nervous breakdowns, and I feel as though we have no choice but to die or go crazy. In addition to the atomic bomb earmarked for Tokyo, 8 more such bombs will be completed and ready to finish the nuclear immolation of Japan by November. Also on August 9th, the Japanese suffered yet another in a long list of blows, this one the greatest blow so far. After months of speculation, with the war against Nazi Germany successfully concluded, the Soviet Union suddenly declared war on Japan. To do so, with an eye on seizing as much Japanese territory as possible, the communists simply tore up the neutrality pact that they had signed with Japan in 1941. Although the outnumbered Japanese army fought with typical courage and determination in Manchuria and their other colonies on the Asian mainland, the sheer size and speed of the battle-tested Red Army ensured that very soon the home islands of Japan would be faced with a two-front invasion, the Americans to the south, the communists to the north. As one high-ranking U.S. officer astutely observed months earlier, if at any time the USSR should enter the war, all Japanese will realize that absolute defeat is inevitable, and thus, when General Toroshiro Kawabe, the deputy chief of staff of the Japanese army, was asked later, he admitted that the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki only became known in a gradual manner. It was not foremost in Japanese reasons for surrendering unconditionally. Indeed, at most, the atomic bombs were a distant second or even third as Japanese reasons to surrender. Even as the atomic bombs were being dropped, there was even then several firebombing raids in progress throughout the destroyed nation. But in comparison, General Kawabe continued, the Soviet entry into the war was a great shock. It was as though the bird was breaking into an empty house, thought one cynical Japanese officer. As most Japanese leaders now suddenly realized, not only was there absolutely no possibility of defeating even one, much less two colossal armies, but if the communists swarmed onto the home islands, they would not only insist upon the removal of the emperor, just as the Americans had been demanding, but they would also force a Marxist regime on the people. And since both changes would, in effect, mean the spiritual and cultural death of the Japanese people, it was a situation Japanese leaders were determined to forestall. The following day, the Japanese offered to the United States their surrender terms again. The new terms being virtually the same surrender terms they had offered in January of that year, and the same term offered several times afterwards: surrender with the emperor. With General MacArthur's pragmatic insistence that maintaining the emperor in his place could be used as an efficient and economical way of controlling the Japanese people during the U.S. occupation, this time Truman and the Americans accepted it. Over the next several days, the two sides discussed the details of surrender. Nevertheless, with final surrender pending and peace at hand, U.S. Air Commander LeMay could not pass up the opportunity to strike one more terrible blow against the hated Japs. Assembling the biggest air armada thus far, over 1,000 planes, the general sent them raiding Tokyo, Osaka, and other Japanese cities, adding to the destruction and death count. Indeed, the unconditional surrender between Japanese and the U.S. was signed before the returning aircraft touched down at the bases. And so once again, thousands of Japanese, just as thousands of Germans, thus survived years of war only to die on the first day of peace. 2. This final act of barbarity had no more to do with the surrender of Japan than the atomic bombs or the month of firebombing raids. It simply felt good. Curiously, General James Doolittle, hero of the largest symbolic first raid in Japan in early 1942 and commander of the U.S. 8th Air Force, refused to send his crews into the air during the last raid in Japan, more concerned with keeping his men alive to enjoy peace than eager to kill even more Japanese women and children. Good for you, man. Finally that day, August 15, 1945, the thing which Japan had been trying to do since early that year, surrender, was at last accepted by the Americans, and World War II, the most destructive, the most deadly, the most evil, and the most avoidable war in human history, technically came to an end. And with that end, perhaps as many 5 million Japanese soldiers, sailors, and airmen thus surrendered to the Americans and the British. At the same time, hundreds of thousands more also surrendered to the Soviets on the Asian mainland. Cruelly, ironically, a majority of this latter group would soon end up as slaves in Siberia, ceaselessly dropping and dying in the same mines and forests as their former German allies. Yes. It came to an end. A lot of things came to an end. Following the absolute devastation of Hiroshima, after the blast, after the fire, the wind, himself seriously injured, stumbling through the ruins of his beloved hometown, Dr. Michihiko Hachiya tried desperately to comprehend what great force could have accomplished such death and destruction so quickly, trying to understand and make sense of what possibly could create such complete and utter ruin. Although most of what he saw and experienced made no sense, one sight did stand out with absolute clarity in the doctor's mind. It was a symbolic sight and one he would never forget. Somewhere in the jumbled debris, Dr. Hachiya saw large numbers of sharpened bamboo spears. Nearby, he also stared at boxes of wooden bullets. Even then, the comparison and the contradiction was clear to the doctor. It had always been a war that Japan could never have won. It was a war between a modern industrial giant and a brave but backward dwarf. The war had been utterly unwinnable, and the war had been utterly a massacre.